Before we get to this week's episode, I'd like to remind you all that my book, The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, is available through most major bookstores. It would be lovely if you would purchase it through the Jessica Kingsley Publishers website. Just do a little Google. It's a great book for people brand new to non-monogamy or people who have tried it for a while and need a little bit more structure. You can head to nonmonogamyhelp.com/book for more details and to show an interest in the audiobook, which would be really, really helpful to me. If you've bought it and read it, please give it a rating or review on Amazon. If you don't mind, that's also very helpful. Thank you so much for your support. Let's get to this week's episode.
Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 90 of the Non-Monogamy Help podcast. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com and I'll either read them in the podcast here or I will write them in the column anonymously. You're more than welcome to let me know what you would prefer. Otherwise, I'll just make a decision myself. If you want to read the columns and listen to the podcast, you can go to the website and find lots of other fun stuff at nonmonogamyhelp.com. Subscribe to the newsletter by going to go.nonmonogamyhelp.com/email. And that's really good because you'll get everything in your inbox and you don't even have to remember. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Non-Monogamy Help. If you want to support the columns and the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month helps support the daily running of the columns and the podcast, and it just shows me a general vote of support. It's like, yeah, I really like this podcast, and like every single time I get a little email that says I have a new patron, it's really nice. So go to patreon.com/Lola Phoenix, and if you donate $5 or more a month, your name, with your permission, will be read at the end of the podcast. Let's get to this week's discussion question. If this is the first time you're ever hearing an episode, every week I introduce a discussion question that you can use with your friends, partners, anyone you want to get to know a little bit more. I also answer it myself briefly to give you a little bit of context. This week's discussion question is, how do you feel towards your exes and why? Well, this is interesting. I think it's always an interesting question to ask, especially to people that you are going to date. Not because I necessarily think that it's bad if people don't get along with their exes, or if they do get along with their exes. I don't have strong opinions either way. I feel a little bit sketchy about people who are like, yeah, all my exes are crazy. I kind of feel like, okay, but it's an interesting exploration to have. I would say I'm pretty positive towards all of my exes pretty much. I'm pretty positive towards them. I don't have any kind of lingering negative stuff. A lot of even the breakups I'd say the majority of the breakups that I have weren't necessarily amicable, but I don't have any hatred towards them. I think if I thought about our relationship, there might have been things where I was like, oh, I wish that had been different, and I might be a little bit still annoyed if I really explore my feelings, but more or less, I'm just like, okay, it happened, it's done now, and that's the end. And that's kind of how I feel about it. I have no problem being their friends. Some I have an ex that I'm still really close friends with, and I don't want to not be close friends with them because, we were together for quite a while. So that's how I feel about it. So yeah, let me repeat the question. How do you feel towards your exes and why? Let's get to this week's letter. I recently went through a breakup with my anchor partner of 1 year. While amicable, I'm still heartbroken and taking some time away from them to adjust to new standards/expectations for our relationship, platonic, going forward. I have a couple of other relationships with other people I'm building, but they're all fairly new, on the 5th or 6th date or so. How should I bring up this breakup with my current partners? I don't want them to feel like they're second best, nor burden someone I'm still getting to know with comforting me, but I want to be honest about where I'm at. Before we get to this week's answer, I'm going to quickly plug this episode's sponsor, BetterHelp. Quite often in a lot of my columns and my podcasts, I tell people that they should find a polyamory-friendly therapist because I'm not a therapist. And I don't really want to be, no offense, but it's not my bag and I can't support you as a therapist would. So I think that you should go find one. And I think even if you're not having relationship trouble, it might be worth just having a couple of visits. Therapy is really awesome. I can't really say enough about how much it's changed my life. Anyway, for a lot of people, finding a therapist locally may be completely impossible, out of their budget. It may be hard to find someone who understands polyamory, and the entire task of looking up and trying to go through therapists can be a big thing that you don't want to do. BetterHelp allows you to find therapists online that you can send messages to. You can switch therapists if one's not working, and they do offer some financial aid. You can get 10% off your first month by using the promo code Non-Monogamy Help at checkout, or going to betterhelp.com/non-monogamy help. Let's get to this week's answer. I would say bring it up when it's relevant. The same thing that you would do for a friendship that you're building. I don't think that you should assume that by bringing up something difficult that you're expecting people to comfort you, or that comforting you is a burden. Like, okay, yeah, sometimes we don't want to go into our 5th or 6th or 7th date and be like, let me just offload all of my trauma onto you. Let me just tell you all about some of the worst, most grisly experiences of my life. I get that there are boundaries around that, but I kind of feel like the entire point of relationships, whether they're romantic relationships or friendships, is to support one another. And I just feel like if you are going out on your 7th date and they're like, how are you? And you're like, oh, I'm struggling a little bit right now. I just broke up with somebody that I'm living with. You don't have to call it an anchor partner if you don't want to. It depends on how that fits within the context of your relationships and how you do hierarchy, or if you do hierarchy. But you can say, like, if you were to say, yeah, I've been breaking up with my partner and it's rough, and they go, oh my God, and they never call you back, that's an asshole. That's not your fault because you've told them something that you're going through, and comforting you. Like, it's not like you're not expecting someone to, take time off work and come bring you soup. You're just expressing, as you would to a friend, that you're going through some difficult shit right now. And even if they're not interested in dating you, they should still be, like, human and decent and nice and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about that. And they need to negotiate their own boundaries around that, right? Like, if they don't want to, if it depends. Like, if you were to go into the date and you're like, yeah, I'm really struggling, they could approach you and be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry about that. Why don't we use this date to focus on some positive stuff? Or they could say, do you want to talk about it? Like, there's tons of different ways that they could handle the situation that don't involve being like, oh wow, I didn't know you were a human with emotions and problems. Wow, I'm noping out of this. Like, if they're gonna be that much of a dick, and I just think that's dickish. I mean, maybe if your partners are a little bit more, like, casual, I guess, maybe they don't want to hear it. I find it really hard to understand a type of relationship that, of somebody I'm gonna sleep with. I'm assuming that they're, because you mentioned one relationship is platonic, that you're not, ace and sex phobic or all that sorts of stuff. Even if I wasn't sleeping with someone, I just feel like, if I had a friend, and I actually had a friendship like this once, where basically every time I tried to talk about some of the difficult stuff going on in my life, they would basically just not respond. And I'm done with that shit, man. And, you do you, and how you want to do your relationships is how you want to do your relationships. But, like, you should be able to tell somebody that you're building a relationship with, that you're going, you should be able to tell people at work that, without, like, you're not burdening anyone at work. Like, if you were, I've had people tell me, I've had people, when I was a manager and I had a team, I've had people be like, oh, I'm, a family member of mine died, and I'm like, oh my God, like, take all the time you need. Is there anything I can do to help? And it's not a burden to be a decent ass person. I'm not criticizing you, by the way. I really want to impress upon you the fact that you are not a burden for not only going through something that's rough, but also just expressing it. Just expressing that you're going through something is no obligation to anybody to do anything. And if anybody tells you that, that's because they have, I'm gonna just be blunt. That's because they have weak as shit boundaries. Like, I'm sorry. And I I've been in a lot of communities like this, and these types of communities drive me nuts, where basically everybody is displacing all of their human agency and responsibility onto everybody else, to the point where, gosh, I don't even know how to like adequately explain this, but, and I'm not saying you're involved in this, but I'm saying that like, I don't want you to feel like you can't even talk about what's going on in your life. And if anyone in your life has ever made you feel bad, or said, not made you feel bad, but like, if anyone's ever been like, reacted in a way to you expressing something that's going on with you, as if you're demanding that they do something for you, that's just not true. Like, it's not true. They may feel, when somebody expresses something like that, they may feel burdened by that, but that's their situation. Like, it's not something you can control, and it's also not a demand. So yeah, I very, very much feel like, you know, bring it up when it's relevant. If you're feeling down about it, then talk about it. You know, same as you would a friendship. Like, maybe, you know, somebody who you call every day, somebody who's like a really good friend who's known you for a few years, maybe you would call and tell them right away when this happened, because they're within your immediate support structure. But like, even people who are not in your immediate support structure can still be supportive without that being a burden. So I would say, if you're feeling rough about it, be honest and just tell them, like, yeah, I'm going through a breakup. And if you want to, you know, if you don't want them to feel like they're second best, then just, you know, be honest about that and kind of unpack that. Like, do you have anchor partners? Is that something you're considering? Because I kind of feel like, as you're dating people, you should probably at some point have a conversation about how non-monogamy or polyamory, or whatever you want to call it, fits within your life, and what your kind of expectations are, and or what you kind of want out of the relationship. I know that like a lot of modern day, maybe not even modern day, I feel like there's a lot of really shitty relationship advice where people are just encouraged to play games and like, don't talk about your needs and wants because you don't want to scare them away, you don't want to be needy, blah blah. And I'm very much against that. I think that you should be honest about what you want. You should be honest about how you're feeling. And yeah, there might be some people who can't deal with that, but you probably would rather have people in your life who can support you and are wanting to support you, than people who are really, for whatever reason, anxious about giving people support, or are so inconsistent and poor in their own personal self-boundaries that they feel anxiety about you expressing that you need something, because they're too much of a people pleaser to say no to you. You don't want to have that type of relationship anyway, I would think. So just be honest about it. Because you gotta be able to say stuff like that to even coworkers. Like, I don't know. And I'm not like buddy with my coworkers. I find the idea of like, I don't mind being friends, right? But I find the idea of, sometimes I feel like people a little too much buddy. And yeah, I kind of like to keep my work and my personal life separate. So, but even so, if I was going through a breakup and it applied to the situation, and, you know, I remember one time during work, you know, I had a situation where a friend of mine committed suicide, and it was really upsetting. And I told my boss, like, on one-to-one, I just said, like, look, if I had a friend of mine who recently passed, and if I'm kind of disconnected, that's why. And I also had like a really upsetting time with another friend, and it made me really snappy at work and say something mean. And I said to the person, I apologized, and I said, you know, I have a friend who's doing this, and that's why I'm kind of really short, and I really don't mean it. And they completely understood. I just feel like you should be able to have this conversation with somebody you're going on a date, you know. I don't know, maybe I'm wild, but I think even on the first date, like if I was on a first date with somebody and I asked them how they were doing, and they were like, oh, you know, I'm going through it because I'm going through it, you know, I just went through a breakup and it's hard. I mean, I might steer that conversation to say, oh, okay, I'm sorry you're feeling that way. How can, you know, what can we do on this date to, hopefully this date cheers you up, and hopefully it's, you know, you don't have to, it doesn't have to become a therapy session. It can just be like, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. Like, let's do something fun and take your mind off it, you know? So yeah, that's my very long-winded, I feel like this didn't have to take as long as it did, But I just want you to feel like you can talk about your life with people. And the people who react negatively to that, or the people who decide that it's their responsibility to manage you, are people with poor boundaries. And you don't have to take that personally. You can keep living your authentic self. And the people who have crappy boundaries, if that doesn't show up then as a way to stay, maybe you're not wanting to be in a relationship with them, then maybe that will show up later on down the line when it's much worse. So yeah, bring it up when it's relevant, just as you would do with a friend. And if anyone decides that they don't want to know the intimate details of your life and you want to build a relationship with them, I mean, it's up to you. But I think, yeah, probably you're not as compatible as you would like to be. So I hope that helps, and good luck. Thank you for listening to episode 90 of the Non-Monogamy Help podcast. Wow. If you want to become an awesome person, you can become a patron. If you donate $5 or more, your name with your permission will be read at the end of this podcast, which is now. The current patrons are Laura Boylan, Chris Albury Jones, Juke, Ellen Robertson, Nikki Jones, James Wartell, Leo Yaki, and Tyler Teekno. If for whatever reason you can't become a patron, because I understand not everybody has expendable income, even though you can totally get a whole year of Patreon support with discounts, it's still a lot. It's fine. You can go to iTunes and find the podcast, rate and review it. Apparently you can also review it on Spotify. I don't know. I haven't seen that yet. Maybe by the time this comes out, I will have seen it. But either way, wherever you can find the podcast, rate and review it. That would be so helpful, and you don't have to write a review. If you do, please send me a screenshot of it on YouTube. Good Lord. Send me a screenshot of it on Twitter. I don't know what social networks I'm on Twitter or Instagram, any of that, that'd be really great, because it doesn't give me a notification, and that really still annoys me, still to this day. Anyway, so this is the 90th episode, which means that I'm probably going to be taking a break, so there's probably going to be a column next week, and then a break, and then another column, and then another podcast. That's probably how it's going to happen. But I will double check closer to the time and let you know on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. I very, very much I'll probably let you know on Twitter because not Instagram. But anyway, thank you so much. And yeah, I appreciate you guys. This is 90 episodes. That's pretty amazing. Thanks for the ride. And yeah, that's all I got to say. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. The music was done by Chris Albury Jones at albury-jones.com. Our podcast art was done by Dom Young at domduong.com. Thank you again for listening.